from Tales from the Shadows, and I'm going to be reading one of my favourite books, Melisande by Nesbit. This copy has been illustrated by P.J. Lynch. I hope you enjoy it as much as I do. When the Princess Melisande was born, her mother, the Queen, wished to have a christening party, but the King put his foot down and said he would not have it. "I've seen too much trouble come of christening parties," he said. "However careful you are with your visiting book, some fairy or other is sure to get left out, and you know what that leads to. Why, even in my own family, the most shocking things have occurred. The fairy Malvola was not asked to my great-grandmother's christening, and you know all about the spindle and the 100 years' sleep." "Perhaps you're right," said the Queen. "My own cousin by marriage forgot some stuffy old fairy or other when she was sending out the cards for her daughter's christening, and the wretch turned up at the last moment, and the girl has dropped toes out of her mouth to this very day." "Just so. And then there was the business of the mouse and the kitchen maids," said the King. "We'll have none of that nonsense about it. I shall be her godfather, and you shall be her godmother, and we will not ask a single fairy. That way none of them can be offended." "Unless they all are," said the Queen. And that is exactly what happened. When the King and the Queen and the baby got back from the christening, the parlour maid met them at the door and said, "Oh, your Majesties, several ladies have called. I told them you were not at home, but they all said that they would wait." "Are they in the parlour?" asked the Queen. I've shown them into the throne room, your Majesty," said the parlour maid. "You see, there are several of them." There's a lovely picture of the King and his baby daughter and the Queen. And as you can see in this picture, there were indeed several of them. There were about 700. The great throne room was crammed with fairies of all ages and all degrees of beauty and ugliness. Good fairies and bad fairies, flower fairies and moon fairies, fairies like spiders and fairies like butterflies. And as the Queen opened the door and began to say how sorry she was to have kept them waiting, they all cried out with one voice, "Why didn't you invite me to the christening party?" "I haven't had a party," said the Queen, and she turned to the King and whispered, "I told you so." This was her only consolation. "You've had a christening," said the fairies all together. I'm very sorry," said the poor Queen. But Malvola pushed forward and said, "Hold your tongue," most rudely. Malvola is the oldest, as well as the most wicked of the fairies. She is deservingly unpopular and has been left out of more christening parties than all the rest of the fairies put together. "Don't make excuses," she said, shaking her finger at the Queen. "That only makes your conduct worse. You know well enough what happens if a fairy is left out of a christening party. We are all going to give our christening presents now. As the fairy of highest social reputation, I shall begin. The princess shall be bald." The Queen nearly fainted as Malvola drew back, and another fairy in a smart bonnet with snakes on it stepped forward with a rustle of bat wings. But the King stepped forward too. "No, you don't," he said. "I wonder at you, ladies, I do indeed. How can you be so unfairy-like? Have none of you been to school? Have none of you studied the history of your own race? Surely you don't need a poor, ignorant king like me to tell you that this is no go." "How dare you!" cried the fairy in the bonnet, and the snakes in it quivered as she tossed her head. "It's my turn, and I say that the princess shall be—" "Look here," said the King, "I won't have it. Listen to reason, or you'll be sorry afterwards. A fairy who breaks the tradition of fairy history goes out, you know she does, like a flame on a candle. And all tradition shows that only one bad fairy has ever been forgotten at a christening party, and the good ones are always invited. So either there is not a christening party, or else you were all invited except one, and, by her own showing, that was Malvola. It nearly always is. Do I need to make myself clear? Several of the better class of fairies, who had been led away by Malvola's influence, murmured that there was something to what His Majesty said. "Try it, if you don't believe me," said the king. "Give your nasty gifts to my innocent child, but as sure as you do, out you will go, like a candle flame. Now then, will you risk it?" No one answered, and presently several fairies came up to the Queen and said it was but such a pleasant party, but they really had to be going. This example decided the rest. One by one, all the fairies said their goodbyes and thanked the Queen for the delightful afternoon they had spent with her. "It's been quite lovely too," said the lady with the snakes in her bonnet. "Do ask us again soon, dear Queen. I have been so longing to see you again, and the dear baby." And she went off, with the snakes trimming and quivering even more than ever. When the last of the fairies was gone, the Queen ran to look at the baby. She tore off its little lace cap and burst into tears, for all the baby's downy golden hair came off with the cap, and the Princess Melisande was as bald as an egg. "Don't cry, my love," said the King. "I have a wish lying by, which I never had occasion to use. My fairy godmother gave it to me as a wedding present, but since then I've had nothing to wish for." "Thank you, my dear," said the Queen, smiling through her tears. "I'll keep the wish until the baby grows up," the King went on, "and then I shall give it to her, and if she likes she can wish for hair if she will." "Oh, won't you wish for it now?" said the Queen, dropping a mix of tears and kisses onto the baby's smooth round head. "No, dearest. She may want something more then when she grows up. Besides, her hair may grow back on its own." But it never did. Princess Melisande grew up as beautiful as the sun and as good as gold, but never a hair grew on that little head of hers. The Queen sewed little caps of green silk, and the princess's pink and white face looked out of these like a flower peeping out of its bud. And every day as she grew older, she grew dearer, and she grew dearer, she grew better, and as she grew more good, she grew more beautiful. Now, when she was grown up, the Queen said to the King, "My love, our dear daughter is old enough to know what she wants. Let her have the wish." Here's another lovely picture. Little bald princess. So the King wrote to his fairy godmother and sent the letter by butterfly. He asked if he might hand on to his dear daughter the wish the fairy had given him as a present. "I've never had occasion to use it," he said, "though it has always made me happy to remember that I have such a thing in the house. The wish is as good as new, and my daughter is now of an age to appreciate it." To which the fairy replied, also by return butterfly, "Dear King, pray do whatever you like with my poor little present. I'd quite forgotten about it, but I am pleased to think you have treasured my humble keepsake for all these years. Your affectionate godmother, Fortuna F." So the King unlocked his gold safe with several diamond-handled keys that hung by his girdle, and he took out the wish and gave it to his daughter. And Melisande said, "Father, I wish that all your subjects should be quite happy." But they already were, because the King and Queen were so good, so the wish did not go off. So then she said, "Then I wish them all to be good." But they were already, because they were happy, and it's easy to be good when you're happy. So again, the wish hung free. Then the Queen said, "Dearest, for my sake, wish what I tell you." "Why, of course I will," said Melisande. The Queen whispered in her ear, and Melisande nodded. Then she said aloud, "I wish I had golden hair 1 yard long, and that it would grow 1 inch every day, and grow twice as fast every time it was cut, and—" "Stop!" cried the King, and the wish went off. And the next moment the Queen stood smiling, and the Princess Sorry. And the next moment, the princess stood smiling at him through a shower of golden hair. "Oh, how lovely," said the queen. "What a pity you interrupted her, dear. She hadn't quite finished." "What was the end?" asked the king. "Oh," said Melisande, "I was only going to say, and twice as thick." "It's good enough that you didn't," said the king. "You've done about enough." For, you see, he had a mathematical mind, and could do sums about grain and wheat on a chessboard and nails on a horseshoe in his royal head without any trouble at all. "Why, what is the matter?" said the queen. "You shall know soon enough," said the king. "Come, let's be happy while we may. Give me a kiss, little Melisande, and then go to your nurse and ask her to teach you how to comb your hair." "I already know," said Melisande. "I often comb mother's." "Your mother has beautiful hair," said the king, "but I fancy you shall find your own much less easy to manage." And indeed it was so. The princess's hair began a yard long, and it grew an inch every night. If you know anything at all about the simplest sums, you will see that in about 5 weeks, her hair was almost 2 yards long. This was a very inconvenient length. It trailed on the floor, and it swept up the dust all through the palace. Of course, it was gold dust. Still, it's not very nice to have in your hair. And the princess's hair was growing an inch every night. When it was 3 yards long, the princess could not bear it any longer. It was so heavy and so hot. So she borrowed her nurse's scissors and cut it all off. And for a few hours she was comfortable. But the hair went on growing, now twice as fast as before, so that in 36 days it was as long as ever. The poor princess cried with tiredness. When she couldn't bear it any more, she cut her hair and was comfortable for a very little time, for now the hair grew 4 times as fast as at first, and in 18 days it was as long as before, and she had to cut it. Then it grew 8 inches a day, and the next time it was cut it grew 16 inches a day, and then 32 inches, and then 64 inches, and 128 inches a day, and so on, growing twice as fast each time it was cut, till the princess would go to bed at night with her hair clipped short, and wake up in the morning with yards and yards of golden hair flowing about the room, so she could not move without pulling her own hair, and the nurse had to come up and cut her hair off before she could even get out of bed. "I wish I was bald again," sighed the poor princess, looking at the little green caps she used to wear as she cried herself to sleep at night between the golden billows of her golden hair. But she never let her mother see her cry, because it was the queen's fault, and Melisande did not want to reproach her. There's a lovely picture here of the poor princess desperately trying to get out of bed with all of her hair. When first the princess's hair grew, her mother sent locks off to all of her royal relations, who had them set in rings and brooches. Later, the queen was able to send enough for bracelets and girdles, but presently so much hair was cut off that they had to burn it. Then, when autumn came and all the crops failed, it seemed as though all of the gold of the harvest had gone into the princess's hair, and then there was famine. Then Melisande said, "It seems a pity we waste all my hair. It does grow so very fast. Couldn't we stuff things with it, or something, and then sell it to feed the people?" So the king called a council of merchants, and they sent out samples of the princess's hair, and soon the orders came pouring in, and the princess's hair became a staple export of that country. They stuffed pillows with it, and they stuffed beds with it. They made ropes for sailors to use, and curtains for hanging in the king's palaces. They made hair cloths of it for hermits and old people who wished to be uncomfortable. But it was so soft and silky that it only made them happy and warm, which they did not wish to be. So the hermits gave up wearing it, and instead mother bought it for their little babies, and well-born infants wore shirts of princess hair cloth. And still the hair grew and grew. The people were fed, and the famine came to an end. Then the king said, "It was all very well while the famine lasted, But now I shall write to my fairy godmother and see if something cannot be done. So he wrote and sent a letter by Skylark, and the bird returned with the answer. Why not advertise a competition for a prince? Offer the usual reward. So the king sent out his heralds all over the world to proclaim that any respectable prince with proper references wishing to marry the princess should come, and it would be so if he could stop her hair growing. Then from far and near came trains of princes anxious to try their luck. They brought all sorts of nasty baggages with them, things in bottles and round wooden boxes. The princess tried all the remedies, but she did not like any of them, and she did not like any of the princes, so her heart was rather glad that none of the things in the nasty bottles and boxes seemed to make the least difference to her hair. The princess had to sleep in the great throne room now, because there was no other room big enough to hold all of her hair and herself. And here's our train of hopeful princes with all of their concoctions. When she woke in the morning, the long high room would be quite full of her golden hair, packed tight and thick like wool in a barn. And every night she would sit in her green silk gown by the window and cry and kiss the little green caps she used to wear and wish herself bald again. It was at this time, as she sat crying there on Midsummer's Eve, that she first met Prince Florizle. Here is our prince. He had come to the palace that evening, but he would not appear in her presence with the dust of travel on him, and she had retired with her hair bound by 20 pages before he had bathed and changed his garments and entered the reception room. He now was walking in the garden in the moonlight, and he looked up and she looked down, and for the first time Melisande, looking on a prince, wished that he might have the power to stop her hair growing. As for the prince, well, he wished a great many things, and the first of which was granted to him, for he said, "Are you Melisande? Are you Florizle? There are a great many roses growing about your window," he said to her, "and there are none down here." She threw him one of 3 white roses she held in her hand, and then he said, "White rose trees are strong. May I climb up to you?" "Surely," said the princess, and so he climbed up the window. "Now," he said, "if I can do what your father asks, will you marry me?" "My father has promised that I shall," said Melisande, playing with the white rose in her hand. "Dear princess," he said, your father's promise is nothing to me. I want yours. Will you grant it to me?" "Yes," she said, and gave him the second rose. "I want your hand." "Yes," she said. "And your heart with it?" "Yes," said the princess, and she gave him the third rose. "And a kiss to seal the bargain?" "Yes." "And a kiss to go with the hand?" "Yes." "And a kiss to bring the heart?" "Yes," said the princess, and gave him the 3 kisses. "Now," he said, when he had given them back to her, "tonight," and here are our 2 lovers. "Now," he said, when he had given them back to her, "tonight, do not go to bed. Stay by your window, and I shall stay down here in the garden and watch. And when your hair has grown to fill the room, call to me. Then do exactly what I tell you." "I will," said the princess. So, at dewy sunrise, the prince, lying on the turf beside the sundial, heard her voice. "Florizle, Florizle, my hair has grown so long that it's pushing me out the window." "Get down onto the windowsill," he said, "and then twist your hair 3 times about the great iron hook there." And she did. And then the prince climbed up the rose bush with his naked sword in his teeth. He took the princess's hair in hand and yelled at her, "Jump!" The princess jumped and screamed, for now she was hanging by the hook by about 1.5 yards of her hair. The prince had a tight grip on the hair, and he drew his sword across it. Then he let her gently down by her hair till her feet were on the grass, and jumped down after her. Here's a lovely picture. They started talking in the garden till the shadows crept under the poplar trees, and the sundial said that it was breakfast time. When they went to breakfast, all of the court crowded around to wonder and admire, for the princess's hair, it had not grown. "How did you do it?" asked the king, shaking Florizle's hand warmly. "The simplest thing in the world," said the prince modestly. "You have always been cutting the hair off the princess. I just cut the princess off the hair." "Humph," said the king, who had a logical mind. And during breakfast, he more than once looked anxiously at his daughter. When they got up from breakfast, the princess rose, with the rest, but she rose, and rose, and rose, till it seemed as though there would never be any end of it. The princess was nearly 9 feet high. "As I feared," said the king sadly. "I wonder what the rate of progress shall be this time. You see," he said to poor Florizle, "when we cut off her hair, it grows. When you cut the princess off, she grows. I wish you had happened to think of that." The princess, she went on growing. By dinner time, she was so large she had to have her dinner brought out into the garden, because she was too large to get indoors. But she was too unhappy to eat anything. She cried so much that there was quite a pool at the garden, and several pages were nearly drowned. So she remembered her Alice in Wonderland and stopped crying at once. But she did not stop growing. She grew bigger and bigger and bigger, until she had to go outside of the palace gardens and sit in the commons, and even then it was too small to hold her comfortably, for every hour she grew twice as much as she had the hour before, and nobody knew what to do, nor where the princess was going to sleep. Fortunately, her clothes had grown with her, or she would have been rather cold. And there's our poor princess. Now she sat in the common, with her green gown embroidered with gold, and looked like a great hill covered in gorseflower. You cannot possibly imagine how large the princess was growing, and her mother stood wringing her hands in the castle tower, and Prince Florizle looked broken-hearted to see his princess snatched from his arms and turned into a lady as big as a mountain. The king did not weep or look on. He sat down at once and wrote to his fairy godmother asking for advice. He sent a weasel with the letter, and the return weasel, he got his own letter back marked, "Gone away, no address left." It was now, when the kingdom was plunged into gloom, that a neighbouring king took it into his head to send an invading army against the island where Melisande lived. They came in ships, and they landed a great number. Melisande looked down from her great height and saw the alien soldiers marching on the sacred soil of her country. "I don't mind so much now," she said, "if I can really be of some use in this size." So she picked up the army by the handful and the double handful and put them back on their ships, and gave each a little flick, with her finger, which sent the ships tumbling so fast they never stopped until they reached their own country. And when they arrived there, the whole army to a man said he would rather be court-martialed 100 times over again than go near the place with the giant princess. And here's Melisande defending her country. Meantime, Melisande, sitting on the highest hill in the island, felt the land trembling and shaking under her giant feet. "I do believe I'm getting too heavy," she said, and jumped off the land into the sea, which was just up to her ankles. Just then came a great fleet of warships, and gunboats and torpedo boats. They came into sight on their way to attack the island. Melisande could have easily sunk them all with one kick, but she did not like to do so because it might have drowned the sailors, and besides, it could have swamped the whole island. So she simply stooped and picked up the island as you would pick up a mushroom. For, of course, all islands are supported by a stalk underneath, and she carried it away to another part of the world. So when the warships got to where the island was marked on the maps, they found nothing but sea, and a very rough sea it was, because the princess had churned it all up with her ankles as she walked away with the island. When Melisande reached a suitable place, very sunny and warm, and with no sharks in the water, she set down the island, and the people made it fast with anchors, and then everyone went to bed, thanking the kind fates that they had sent them such a great princess to help them in their hour of need, and calling her the saviour of the country and the bulwark of the nation. But it's poor work being the nation's bulwark and your country's saviour when you are miles high and have no one to talk to, and all you want is to be your humble size again and to marry your sweetheart. And when it was dark, the princess came close to the island and looked down from far up at her palace and her tower, and she cried and cried and cried. It does not matter how much you cry in the sea, it hardly makes any difference, no matter how large you are. Then, when everything was quite dark, the princess looked up at the stars. I wonder how soon it shall be when I'm big enough that I knock my head against them, she said. And as she stood stargazing, she heard a whisper in her right ear. A very little whisper, but quite plain. Cut off your hair! Now, everything the princess was wearing had grown big with her, so now dangling from her golden girdle was a pair of scissors as big as the Malin Peninsula, together with a pincushion the size of the Isle of Wight, and a yard measure that could have easily gone around Australia. And when she heard the little voice, she knew, small as it was the voice of her dear Prince Florizle. And she whipped the scissors out of their golden case and snip, 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 cut off all of her golden hair and let it fall into the sea. The coral insects got hold of it and at once began to set to work. And now they've made it into the biggest coral reef in the world. But that has nothing to do with the story. Then the voice said, "Get closer to the island!" And the princess did. But of course she could not get very close because she was so large. And she looked up again at the stars, and they really did seem much further off. Then the voice said, "Be ready to swim!" And she felt something climb out of her ear and begin to clamber down her arm. The stars got further and further away, and the next moment the princess found herself swimming in the sea, and Prince Florizle was swimming beside her. "I crept up your hand when you were carrying the island," he explained when their feet touched sand and they were walking through the shallow water, "and I got into your ear with an ear trumpet. You never noticed me because you were so great then." "Oh, my dear prince," cried Melisande, falling into his arms, "you have saved me. I am my proper size again." So they went home and told the king and queen. Both were very, very happy, but the king rubbed his chin in his hand and said, "You have certainly had fun for your money, young man. But don't you see that we are just exactly where we were before? Why, the child's hair has already begun to grow again." And indeed it was. Then, once more, the king sent a letter to his fairy godmother. He sent it by flying fish, and by return of fish there came an answer. "I'm just back from my holidays. Sorry for all your troubles. Why not try scales?" And on this message the whole court pondered for hours. But the prince caused a great pair of golden scales to be made, and had them set up in the palace garden under a big oak. The next morning he said to the princess, "My darling Melisande, I must really speak seriously to you. We are both getting on with life. Why, I am nearly 20. It is time we thought about getting settled. Will you trust me entirely and get into one of those golden scales?" So he took her down into the garden and helped her into the scales, and she curled up in her green and gold gown like a little grass mound with buttercups on it. "What are you going to put in the other scales?" asked Melisande. "Your hair," said Florizle. "You see, when your hair is cut off you, it grows. When you are cut off your hair, you grows. Oh, my heart's delight, I can never forget how you grew, never. But if when your hair is no more than you, and you are no more than your hair, I snip the scissors between you and it, then neither you nor your hair can possibly decide which ought to go on growing." "But suppose both," said the princess. "Impossible," said the prince with a shudder. "There are limits even to Malvola's malevolence. And, besides, Fortuna said scales. Will you try it?" "I will do whatever you wish," said the poor princess. "Oh, but let me kiss my father and mother again once, and my nurse, and you. Oh, my dear, just in case I grow large again and can never kiss anybody." So they all came, and one by one were kissed by the princess. Then the nurse cut off the princess's hair, and at once it began to grow at a frightful rate. The king and the queen and the nurse busily began to pack it as it grew into the other scales, and gradually the scales went down a little. The prince stood waiting between the scales with his drawn sword, and just before the two were equal, he struck. During the time it took his sword to flash down through the air, the princess's hair grew a yard or two, so that in the instant he struck, the balance was true. "You are a young man of sound judgment," said the king, embracing him, while the queen and the nurse ran to help the princess out of the scales. The scales was full of golden hair that bumped down to the ground as the princess stepped out of the other... "You are a young man of sound judgment," said the king, embracing him, while the queen and the nurse ran to help the princess out of the golden scale. The scale full of golden hair bumped down onto the ground as the princess stepped out and stood there before all those who loved her, laughing and crying with happiness, because she now remained her proper size, and her hair, it had not grown. She kissed the prince 100 times, and the very next day they were married. Everyone remarked on the beauty of the bride, and it was noticed that her hair was quite short, only about 5 feet and a quarter inches long, just down to her pretty ankles. Because the scales had been 10 feet and a half inches apart, and the prince had a true eye and had cut the golden hair exactly in the middle. I hope you enjoyed that story. Goodbye.